Good evening. Welcome at Studium Generale. We have a beautiful program about vertical farming. That's a really fascinating, high-tech, high-rise technology and a new way of producing food, a very efficient way of producing food. How does this stacking of plants work? How do you feed them? How do you harvest them? You see already some vertical farms there. And how much more efficient is a vertical farm if you compare it to a old school horizontal farm? If you look per square meter, how much more efficient is it? These are questions we posed to Professor Leo Marcelis. And I'm really delighted that you came from Wageningen to Enschede to answer all these questions and many more questions I ask you, but we will see them in due course. Leo Marcelis is a full professor, horticulture and product physiology. You see it here on the sheet already, at Wageningen University. And he is one of the world's leading scientists with respect to vertical farming. So, I want a big hand for Leo Marcelis.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much, Peter. And good to see so many people here. I'm very happy to be here in Twente at University Twente. University where we also collaborate with from Wageningen. And as indicated, yeah, I'm working on plants growing in high-tech environments. It's just about greenhouses. It's about vertical farms. So vertical farms is indeed inside buildings. But before I start, let's look a little bit about the general context. A number of things that you're writing down here probably don't need to explain. We all know there's climate change, and unfortunately we have every time. There are examples like recently now in Spain, in Valencia, just, well, one of the examples. So there is really something going on in the world. There's water shortage now, even in the Netherlands. Sometimes in some of, not this year, but in some recent summers, we have even in the Netherlands a shortage of water. But think worldwide, there's really a shortage of fresh water. And plants need a lot. Plant production is a very big consumer of water. And still, pesticides are commonly used in a lot of food production. So to control the pests, the insects, the fungi. But then we don't want that from a sustainability point of view, also not from a safety point of view. We don't like to eat food where there's a lot of chemicals on. And the world population is growing very rapidly. Projections are going towards 9 billion people. And more of those people live in big cities. That all has very big consequences for the production of our food. So if you look at that, well, food production to one extent contributes to climate change if we do not do it in a sustainable way. But climate change may also threaten the production of food. So that is where we think, well, we need a new vision on how to produce the food. And before you now think, oh, so now vertical farming is the only solution? No, it is just, there are many different routes that can contribute, or there is not just one way of producing, but vertical farming is part of it. But if you think about this new vision of food production, and now here for today I will focus on vegetables, on the fresh vegetables. Well, what do we want? We want to, if we eat them, that they are safe, that there are no bacteria on it, or at least no unwanted bacteria, or that there are no chemicals on it. That it is really healthy, that maybe there's extra vitamin C or maybe other health-promoting compounds. But of course, it also needs to be tasty. We want tasty fruit, tasty vegetables, and that it is produced sustainable. And also at this moment, what we see is quite some vegetables, they are transported over the whole world by airplanes. Well, that's not really a sustainable way. So more and more, we want to have a local production. So these are a thing, just as a general context, where we are thinking of about food production. And as I said, vertical farming is not the solution, but can be one route to address those items. But talking about vertical farming, growing in buildings, is very new. But let's look a little bit back in history. So, well, what do we see here? orangery or orangery. So this is already very old buildings where we had already some plants inside buildings. Okay, this is a very long time ago, and we call it, by the way, controlled environment agriculture. So growing the plants under high-tech environments in greenhouses or in buildings, that is used in the literature or in the scientific community and in the sector called controlled environment agriculture. But look a little bit, let's say, about 100 years ago in the Netherlands, where we had the first forms of controlled environment agriculture, some sort of greenhouses, where you see here a few old pictures. Then these pictures is probably from about 1950, 1960 in the Netherlands. Some greenhouses, you see already the difference with the previous ones, but got a little bit technology in. And that is in fact what we see over the years. There comes in more technology and more of a control of the production process. In the field, if you don't do anything, it's just everything, not much is controlled. You're dependent on how much rain is there, how much sun is there, what temperature is there. Now we see we can control it more and more. Here we have a bit of a more modern picture. We see a greenhouse a little bit higher. Also that are, in wintertime sometimes there are lamps being used. Yeah, I call this a modern one. I must be honest, this picture is already 20 years old, but still, these type of greenhouse you can still see. In many cases, it's in particular what you see inside is where the differences are coming. So maybe it's also good, because I guess many of you are maybe not familiar with the production of vegetables in the greenhouses, which is really an enormous, important sector in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is worldwide known for the greenhouse production. It's really a leader in that. And we see also that wherever I go over the world for greenhouse areas, and often there are some Dutch growers, or there's also the whole supply industry around horticulture. They are supply those. Most of the greenhouses worldwide are built by Dutch growers. Okay, so what can it look like in a greenhouse? Here you see some tomatoes, some pepper being grown inside a greenhouse. But for today, I will not talk about greenhouse. But why do I mention this? That we see a little bit of the development. First, we were growing only the vegetables in the field, and we were growing more and more also in greenhouses. You see in the greenhouse the level of technology increasing in order to have a more and more control over the production process. Well, then the next step is not so surprising, because then you can understand that a next step is growing the plants really in a building. We are not dependent anymore if it is a sunny day or a rainy day or a cold day or a windy day. We can control, because what is important for the plants to grow? We need light, we need CO2. Because plants, the basic process is photosynthesis. A leaf absorbs light, takes up CO2, and then you get photosynthesis, forming sugars for which the plants can grow. But of course the plants also need water, minerals. Everything can here be controlled. So if we know what the plant needs, we can exactly give that what is needed. So that's with vertical farming. What is then the most important? Well, first of all, it is growing crops in a building. So we're in a greenhouse, which is typically made of glass in the Netherlands, or in some countries made of plastic, where we still have the solar light, and I would say that's good, but it's very unpredictable. Sometimes it's too little, sometimes there's too much. Here we grow in buildings, and often we do that in, or in most cases, in many layers above each other, as you can see here on the pictures. But sometimes it can also be vertical, where we have, here we have stacked layers. You can also think of vertical layers, vertical walls. Most important, this full control of the production process. If you have a full control over the production process, it means we can grow the crop every day of the year. And I can now say, well, on that specific day of the year, we can produce so many kilograms of a defined quality. And that is impossible in the field. It's not possible in the, well, in the greenhouse. In the field, we cannot produce the whole year round. Also in the greenhouse, well, we could grow the whole year round, but then still, summer production and winter production is still very different. Or, but that's then for the Netherlands, where we have, maybe we don't like our climate so much. However, today was a very nice day, of course. But in the Netherlands, in strictly speaking, we have a very good climate for growing crops. Why is that? Our winters are a bit too cold for growing crops, a bit too dark. But if you go more up north, it's getting more difficult. If you go more east, then we get a land climate. So if you would go to Berlin, winters are much colder than here. But also, let's say our winters are not that good for producing crop, but still reasonable. In the summertime, it's a little bit too hot, but not too hot. If you go to the south, in Spain, in the Mediterranean, there they have a lot of greenhouses. But all greenhouses are empty in summer. It's just too hot and it is too dry. So if you want to grow year-round, in a Dutch greenhouse, you can grow very well. In the vertical farm, you can do it even better, completely independent. But then you can also understand that the advantage of a vertical farm is there in Netherlands, but in an environment, let's say in a climate which is more harsh than the Netherlands, or the summers are hotter, or the winters are cooler, there's even a bigger advantage of a vertical farm. Okay, so we have the full control. Then what is important? We have an extremely little use of land because we have high yield per square meter. Usually on 1 square meter we may get 70 kilograms of vegetables. But typically, if you eat every day 200 gram vegetables, which would be good for everybody to do so, we only need 1 square meter of a shelf because we have many shelves above, layers above each other. We hardly need any land area for the food production. The water use is very limited. Where in the Mediterranean we may need 60 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram, here we can just do it with a few liters. Very little fertilizer use, but I will come back to that later on. And also no pesticide use, and it can just be anywhere. Where I said already, well, the Netherlands is anyway maybe a reasonable country to grow crops outdoor or in the greenhouse. Not optimal, but go to the Middle East. It's far too hot in summer to produce. Vertical farm can easily produce also the crop there. So it's anywhere. We're also not dependent on fertile soil. Often you see that we grow plants when there is a fertile soil. Here we grow in these different layers. Doesn't matter whatever soil it is. So independent of the weather, independent of the soil, can give those guarantees. Well, let's look at just a few pictures. So here we see some large-scale production facilities, all the different layers above each other. Plants need light, so the light comes from LEDs. Quite often we see that purple type of light. That's in fact a largely red light with a little bit of blue, but it can also be white light. Or here an example, maybe you're wondering, hey, what do we see here now? Well, these are the vertical walls, so these are not the stacked layers, but vertical walls. You see the people here in between walking. These are large scale. It can also be smaller scale in shipping containers. So also, well, the advantage of that, it is relatively small, but you can make a very modular system so that just shipping containers converted into a production facility. Also, again, here, one on the right-hand side, you also see the vertical walls. The other one has the, well, it's not so visible, the stacked layers. You see it even in supermarkets. This one was a picture taken in the Albert Heijn in Nijmegen. I must say at this moment it's not there yet anymore, but we see more and more things coming up also on small scale or in supermarkets or at even in some restaurants. Well, I'm not sure if this is vertical farming, but this is, let's say, home appliances that you can buy. I would say this is very nice. Don't do it for the money because it is not cheap, but it is fun to grow the plants in your own home. Or here another example of well, it can be usually you see many layers, but it could also be just one layer. Is what we see here. Well, in the past, well, about 10 years, it was a bit of a hype, and the investments rapidly went up. Worldwide, a lot of money was invested in vertical farm. This also shows, okay, it is very new, because 10 years ago there was hardly any vertical farm. We saw up to 21 a rapid rise in all the investments. And the investments in a company usually did not go by just €1 million, or often not just 10 million euros, but often 100 millions of euros at the same time. So really a lot. Have very high expectations, so maybe there's also one aspect of the high rise. But yeah, then there came the year 2022. And then we got, in fact, that it was not so positive. Not everything was that positive. There were quite some companies facing financial problems. So also quite some companies went bankrupt. And it is still happening because yesterday there was also an announcement of one vertical farm in the US that got bankrupt. Okay, we will come back later. What is happening there? At least what is clear. Now the hype is over. And personally, I think that's good because there were maybe some stories which were just too positive. We need to be back to realism. And you also see it in many new sectors. We have the startup companies. Many startup companies start after some years. They don't make it all. Is that a problem? Yeah, for those companies and for those people working there, that is a problem. Is it for the sector as a whole? Well, usually the sector gets more healthy because then you get the most efficient companies will continue. And that's also what we see now, because also now, again, we see new companies starting up. And here just a few of the news items of the last two, very limited selection. Here, this one, will retailers take the lead in vertical farming investment? And that's also what we see. We see quite often that there is direct agreements between the producer in the vertical farm with the supermarket. And that was, by the way, yesterday also in the news in Sainsbury in the UK, where there was a big startup of a connection between a vertical farm and having that in the shops. So what we also see is here that it is in fact what you often see, a direct connection between the production and the sales, and then often in a localized way, avoiding that we have to transport the food from all over the world. Okay, as I said, in the year 22, that was not so positive. What made that quite some companies went bankrupt? Well, the biggest thing was there's a huge increase that year was in the energy price, related to the war in Ukraine. Energy prices went up. Vertical farming uses a lot of energy, electricity. So then you can understand, if 25% of your costs are related to energy and the energy prices go up tremendously, then you can understand that it is a problem. But also, I wrote here, money got more expensive. What do I mean with that? Up to 22, it was quite, if you wanted to rent some money, so to get the money, well, the interest rate was extremely low. And for a vertical farm, well, what do you need? You need a big investment. And for the running costs, to run the operation, you need a lot of electricity. So that were two factors from 2022 which got less positive. I think that determined that at that moment it was that a lot of companies got into the problems. It was not the full story. It was not just those two factors. I think it was rather that these two factors determined the moment where quite some companies got into the financial problems. And for those remaining, they got a very clear message. You have to do it better. You have to improve the efficiency. But that's also interesting. Well, if you look at what, shake out, or well, let's say where all those companies got into trouble, there were a lot of promises. And then it's good to see, well, what so far really worked out well. What of the promises were kept? Well, high yield, very high yield, the 70 kilograms per square meter shelf layer is really possible. It depends a bit on the conditions, but it could also be more or less, but that's a good number. High quality, very good quality, tasty vegetables, looking good, everything that works very well. Very little use of the land, of the water, of the nutrients. Pesticide use, hardly use any use, or I would say no use of pesticides. That all worked well. But there were also a few things that did not work so well, and that is the costs. The costs are relatively high. And then we think, we have a very good product, we can produce it locally, so you would expect that you get more money for it. But that did not always work so well. Sometimes it just ended up in the supermarket without any different marketing. Then you can also, because high prices, high cost is not the problem if you can get more money for it. Anyway, I think for the future it will anyway be needed that it is just competitive with the general product price. So the energy use is high, and that is not, in fact, not what we want. We Because they say, well, vertical farming is sustainable on many aspects, but not on the energy use. So from a sustainability point of view, we need to reduce the energy use extremely. And apart from the sustainability, the energy represents also a lot of costs, because we could simply say, well, now we use all green energy or renewable energy. Well, there's still a sustainability aspect even on renewable energy, but it does not come for free. So energy use is high. By the way, that's also then one of our key points in our research on bringing down this energy use. Also the labor. Usually it's said that there is not much labor needed because we can automate so well. And yes, we can, but so far most of the companies did not do it. And what we see if I talk with growers in the Dutch greenhouses, I think that sector became so strong because there's a lot of knowledge sharing. What those growers often do, they visit each other, they discuss on how the plants are growing, how they can do it better, and they learn so much from it. Vertical farming is much more closed. I come often at those vertical farms, and before I can enter, I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement that whatever I see, they're so new all, and I can not allowed to tell. And then I go back home in the evening, and I wonder, what did they see, what they did not know, or what they... And I think that's a pity, because if they share each other with the information, they could all get so much better. Well, there were a lot of stories that were not initially true. So that's why I say, well, there were a lot of fairy tales, but now let's make it a fair story. There are many things very good. There are also a few issues to solve. Am I positive or pessimistic? No, I'm optimistic about it, but we need to see all the goods and the bads and see how we further can improve it. I mentioned already the labor. Well, here you see an example. There's a lot of, because there's still a lot of manual work, and that can be automated, in particular in those vertical farms. I would say we have all the knowledge, and I guess also here in Twente, many smart people on how to make the robots. But what do we see so far in many of those vertical farms? Because they are relatively new, quite often they are a bit small. Well, those small ones, usually the automation will not work, because then you need the investment in the robot. Yeah, you can use it maybe 1 hour a day. Yeah, then it's getting expensive. If you are a little bit larger, then maybe you can use it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, then the costs for automation are relatively much smaller. That was the black out. Well, labor, often the farm scale is too small. Is that by definition for vertical farming? No, vertical farms can be big, but you see often small startups. A startup often starts small. Well, then it is a bit difficult to have all that on it. So I still see a lot of manual work. I also see many people in the office, and I think that's good, because then we can develop, because it is so new and we get all the new information. But yeah, then I'm there at a vertical farm and I look around in the office and I see, well, so many people. Whoa, then I can make a rough estimate of what salary that would be. Well, then I know already how much you need to grow. Yeah, that's sometimes out of balance. And that is also what brings me down now. Now we had that a number of companies went bankrupt, and also all those farms got more and more aware of it. Oh, we need to balance that. What is also very nice is what we see now, agriculture has a bit of a not so good image for many reasons, also old-fashioned image. Vertical farming, now we bring much of innovation, high-tech food production. Many young people are interested. We see it at our university on many students coming from all over the world. They think, oh, this is now something cool on growing crops. And that's very good, because that brings a lot of innovation. But at the same time, we still need also the person with the knowledge of growing the crop. Where I see, and we have in the Netherlands a lot of people with a lot of knowledge of the crop. On the other hand, if you are already growing crops for many years, then this is a big step. And I have all this new technology, that maybe not always fit. But in effect, for those companies who are successful, manage to combine it. There are some growers with really knowing how to grow the plant with the green fingers, but also together with people of the high tech, of the new technologies, about engineering. But I have also seen companies have good engineers and maybe a good plant person, But you also need to sell a product. I said, well, if it just ends up in the supermarket with not a label, not that it is a special product, yeah, that's a bit of a pity, because maybe if you sell for what it is, maybe you can get a higher price. Okay, energy, I mentioned already, well, that's a crucial thing. Energy use is high. And why is that so high? That's mainly for the lamps. LEDs. LEDs are very efficient, but still, we need really a lot of light. As I said, that's also in our research where we do a lot of work or focus on to get this down. And it can be bring down a lot. The first part is indeed bringing down the energy use. In fact, that we can produce more with less energy. The second step is, because we will always need to produce the crops in these type of systems, we will need energy. Well, I would say then what we still use should come from renewable sources. But then we can also think about use it when the electricity is cheap. So first step, the drastic reduction in energy use. Well, there's really a lot of things that are unexplored. By the way, then you can think about what does light do with the plants, but it is not just only with the light, it's the whole system. We also need to think about the CO2, the airflow, the air humidity, the whole crop management. Well, but about light, here at the Technology University, so I expect there are also people working on LED technologies. Well, here you can see the different light sources. You see the efficacy of the lamps, and now an LED, a modern LED, well, depends a bit on the color and the mark. Probably it goes up to 75% efficacy in converting the joule electricity into the energy of the light. Well, that's very good, but you can also see in the last 10 years it was an enormous improvement. So that made it in fact possible to make vertical farming much more efficient. But then looking back at what those improvements were, and then I can say, oh, in the past 5 years, so much improvement, the past 10 years, that will not have, you see this curve? Of course, the dashed line is the prediction. Well, nobody can predict it, but we all know much more than this. Well, there's still some improvement possible, about above 75%, but yeah, it will reach some limits. Does it mean that we are here at the end? No, because then comes the next step. The first step is only, well, in fact, the first step is from solar light to electricity or from other sources. Then it is the efficiency of converting the electricity into light. But then comes the efficiency of the plant itself, from light energy to chemical energy, in fact, to the energy stored in a plant. That efficacy is just a few percent. So then you also understand, oh, there is still a lot of room for improvement. And to look at this light use efficiency, we recently look in the literature, how efficient is the light used by crops in the field, in the greenhouse, or in the vertical farm. And we did do this for lettuce. And then to summarize all those literature data, you see here the light use efficiency. We usually express it as how much of plant do you get? And in this case, I took the dry weight. Of course, lettuce we eat the fresh weight, but the dry weight, that is the structural material. That's a good basis to compare. And I did do that here because then I can also compare it to theoretical, what is possible according to theory. So light use efficiency is how much plant do I get per mole of photons. I guess many technical people here, so I hope I do not need to explain what photons are. So the amount of plant you get per unit of light. Well, then we see vertical farm, we see the greenhouse, we see the open field. And yes, not surprising, the vertical farm has the highest light use efficiency. But we can learn much more from this graph. If you look at the vertical farm, there's a huge spread of the data. Some are doing it quite poor, some are doing it extremely well. Yeah, this is all a new system. People need to learn yet. But we see also this gray bar. That is what is theoretical possible. That is what we did do on literature, what is known in the literature. Then it starts with, well, we have light, a photon. Photon is absorbed by a leaf. An electron is excited, and then the photosynthesis process starts. So based on those type of estimates, then the gray bar is more or less what could be theoretical maximum. Well, there was even a publication that people were in that region, Still, I would also not be surprised that maybe it's an error in their measurement. Yeah, who tells? But I guess it is possible to get there. So we can learn two things. The average is still far below the theoretical maximum. Considering that variation, for me it's proof there's a lot of room for improvement. If we get that average value twice the value, it means twice as efficient production. Now, that's a big thing. We also calculated, I said, well, typically maybe we can grow 70 kilograms per square meter. Is that where the limit is? Here we did do some theoretical calculations. Maybe it's too much detail to say it all, but if you give 24-hour light per day, it's not for all plants going well. Very high light intensity, well, maybe we can increase it by 10%. I must say at this moment it will not be possible because there are a number of limits with the quality of the plants. But for me, as a plant scientist, that's the challenge, to get there and to see how far we get there. The most important message is we are still far from what is possible. There's still a lot of room for improvement. And that has to do with how to make use of the light, but also all the other factors. Today I will just say a little bit more about light. If you have light, it's so important for plants. But light has many different aspects. It's about how much light there is, so the light intensity, so the instantaneous intensity of the light. But plants are also sensitive to the day length. We call it the photo period. Is it 12 hours of light per day? Is it 16 hours? Is it 24 hours? Continuous light? Well, some plants can grow very well with 24-hour light. Some other plants get completely disturbed. And why do we need 24 hours? So maybe we are also experimenting on, what if the whole cycle is not 24, but 22 or 26? And then it is about the spectrum. What color of the light? Which color is most efficient for the plants? And the direction of light, even that is important. Yeah, the sun always comes from more or less from above. But I guess you all have seen, you think about, you have a in your house, next to the window, you have a plant. What usually happens then? Usually it bends a bit away from you, it bends to the light. So direction of light also plays a role. So we can even think on where to position the lamps. And with some plants, we also position the lamps now in between the plant. And with the light, the plant can have photosynthesis producing, so it's in fact the energy for growth of the plant. Just do many more, it triggers many plant processes. But of course, it also represents heat. Well, and that's also important. Temperature is very important for the plant. And for a plant, it's not so important what the air temperature is. No, it's important what the plant temperature is. And then we have to think about not only is it the leaf temperature or the stem temperature or the tip temperature of the plant. That all matters. And temperature can be too high, by the way, and temperature can be too low. This is an optimum response for plants. So if you play around with light, we also have to consider on all those 5 factors. Makes it complicated. I would say, well, for me as a plant scientist, that makes it interesting. And then we can see a lot of things to improve. And the funny thing is, if you look at the plant responses, it's full of interactions and feedback loops in the plant. I will not go too much deeper in the plant science, don't worry about that, but maybe it's good to realize that I said, well, there is photosynthesis, that is in fact producing the sugars. Apart from that, the plant has a number of photoreceptors. If I would say it in simple words, you could say it's sort of eyes of the plant. There are pigments that are sensitive to light, and they are sensitive to different parts of the spectrum. There is a sensor or a photoreceptor in the UV part of the light. Most cases, UV light we hardly use in vertical farming, but could be. Blue light, that's an important one. The plant has a number of photoreceptors, the cryptochromes are important. They are in particular sensitive for the blue light. And then we have the phytochromes. The phytochromes, they are in particular sensitive to the red light, but it's a sort of a sensor that can have 2 states. Red versus far red. What is far red? We as plant scientists call far red, that's light between 700 nanometers, 700 to 800 nanometers, so the first part of the near infrared light. With the human eye, we hardly see it, we don't see it. It's often assumed that it does not contribute to photosynthesis of the plants, but a number of other processes are very sensitive. So then it's about the ratio of red to far red light? Well, the plant has these sensors, because depending on what the spectrum is, we get very different responses of the plants. And I can really talk a whole day or days about what all the colors do, but I know that I should finish it, what was it, 8:30, so don't worry. But I will just want to show you a few examples, just what does blue light doing. Well, a lot of text, but maybe you just look at the plants. And I must say, where it says 0% blue, I must say this is white light. To be honest, that's not means 0% blue, because in white light there's roughly about 25 to 30% is already blue. But what we do from left to right, where it says 50% blue, the white light, 50% of the white light is replaced by blue. Everything else is the same. You see, with blue lines, more blue light, you get compact plants. Well, then we can play around with more blue, less blue. And sometimes you want a compact plant, sometimes you want an extended plant. And the funny thing is, by the way, this is tomato. If you would go to 100% blue, then all of a sudden they get very long. This is what you can find in any textbook, but 100% blue, not. Okay, there's a lot of theory behind it. We only hardly understand it, to be honest, but we have some ideas how it works, but I will not do that today. Another color, here is the far red light. So the far red light above 700, from 700 to 800 nanometer, hardly visible. So if you look at the first 4 plants, they were grown under visible light, under red and blue LEDs, a mixture, and then on top of that we added far red light, from left to right in a higher level, from 0 to 150 micromole per square meter per second. Well, then you see this far red, which is hardly photosynthetic active, so not photosynthesis, but the plant responds enormously. But there's one more funny thing or interesting thing, and it's here completely at the right-hand side. There, at the end of the day, we just gave a little bit of far red light. So the light was off, end of day, in fact, at the start of the night. The light was off, we gave a little bit of the far red light, very low intensity. Well, and if you look what you see here on the right-hand side compared to the reference without any far red, it's already quite a bit of a difference. What does this show? Plants are sensitive to the color of the light, but the sensitivity also varies during the day. Some colors are more important in the morning, others more in the evening. By the way, this is in fact classical theory, because this is, think about a nice sunset. So what happens with the sunset? Nice sunset, the sun is going down, it's getting darker and darker, so all the colors shift a little bit to the lower, to the longer wavelengths. So it shifts them back. In nature, what happens every day, at the end of the day, we get a shift from red to far red. So then it's maybe also not so surprising that at that time of the day, the plants are very sensitive to this far red light. So if you look, okay, then about far red, an example here of lettuce, just adding a little bit of far red on the right-hand side. We get a bigger plant. Or here's some more pictures. This is a recent publication of one of my PhD students. And yeah, he called this, you see on the top, no FR means no far red, at the bottom, with far red. Yeah, and then the title of the paper was Paradise by the Far Red Light. So when my PhD student came with that, young guy, and I said, wow, splendid, a song from when I was at high school, and we put it here to connect it to the research. So wonderful, but there's also, well, there is really, with the far red light, we do so much research, we find, and I have now not the time on what all type of process it triggers. It's really tremendous. But also indicating, this is new information, where I'm talking about that the farms at present can be much more efficient. Well, this is where it comes to, making more use of the colors. As I said, first of all, for the growers, what would be important? We need to reduce the use of energy. Anyway, that's a no-regret action, absolutely needed. And then we should use renewable energy. Well, then in the Netherlands, probably most of it comes from solar energy, from wind energy, maybe from bio-waste, from digestion. But then we can also look at the prices. Well, and for those familiar with electricity price, on a Sunday afternoon, when it is windy and sunny, you can get a lot of money by using electricity. It's very weird, but there are now moments that you can get money by using electricity. But of course, if it's then the Monday morning and it's, let's say, raining, so no sun, no wind, so not much supply of energy, the industry starts up, well, then you pay really a lot. So where I started with in a vertical farm, we can control everything. We are not dependent on the outside. Well, I think for energy prices, we really matter. But then for me, as a plant scientist, comes the interesting thing. Wow, now we get a nice optimization study. Optimizing the cost of the energy, versus the yield of the plant, but also the timing of the plant. And then we get questions on, hey, how flexible is the plant? If I give less light tomorrow, can I give more the next day? We also have worked as a concept of plant as a battery. Can the plant store solar energy when it is very cheap? For how long can it store? For 1 day? For 5 days? Not for a month. But for some days it can store. So it can act a little bit. You can see some analogy with a battery. So that's also where our research at this moment is. This is where we really are the limits on what we know about plants, because these are new questions coming up at present. But if you want to optimize it, we also need to know continuously how well the plant is performing. So we need to measure on the plant and more, well, because yeah, you can look at a plant and it can look good, but how do you know how much it is performing now really instantaneous? Well, there are now more and more techniques available. Here you see an example of fluorescence imaging. You give a pulse of light. Some of the light is absorbed. Some comes back by fluorescence if an electron falls back. And that's an indication how efficient the light is being used. But for this also, regular cameras can be used to know a little bit about the plant, usually not the instantaneous response. Thermal cameras. This is all what we see upcoming, that we can continuously monitor how the plant is doing. Then we know instantaneous the efficiency of the plant, and we can optimize it versus the cost and the prediction on when will the plant be harvestable. And where we are working on is then that we go towards an autonomous control. So we have a continuously sensing of how the plant is performing. Then we combine that with predictive models based on the physiology of the plants. I have a very much of a background in simulation modeling of plants based on processes. And I think where we know the processes, those mechanistic models work well and should be used. But we don't know everything. Well, and then we have now that we can combine it with AI. So there we see combining information from different sensors, using some process-based models, combine it with artificial intelligence. And then I see more and more these type of systems where we may have a control room, maybe here in Twente, and maybe that controls a number of vertical farms, or in the Netherlands, or just anywhere in the world. I also get offered the question, is it now? Well, I really think that's where we are going. But is AI now already the solution? Yeah, we can do a lot. And yes, that is where the future is. But at least for now, we still need also the persons with the green fingers that know the plant how to grow. It is about growth of the plant. It's certainly also about quality. This is an example of lettuce. And what we often do is end of production lighting. Can we just do something just before harvest? So initially we want to maximize the growth. Shortly before harvest, we want to maximize the quality. Here we gave, that says high, medium, low. That were light levels in micromoles per square meter second, the last few days before the harvest. Then the lettuce is harvested, stored in darkness, in this case at relatively high temperature. And I'm not sure if it is all visitable, but at the highest light level, they were still a little bit, or they were already a little bit looking better than at the low light intensity. And then 3 weeks after harvest, well, I think you can see here, those which were grown at a low light intensity, yeah, they look really poor. Or, yeah, the others also don't look good, but at least much less. But be lucky that this is just where I was asked to whether I have sound on the video, but Peter, you did not ask whether there was smell. But be happy, because they also don't smell good anymore. Just as an example that how we grow the plant affects the shelf life, affects the quality. And if you want to understand a bit more how it works more, in fact, what more light does do just before harvest, we got more vitamin C in it, we got more sugars in the plant. Well, and that is well known that vitamin C, together with sugars, they are very important for the shelf life of the product. But hey, that's interesting, vitamin C, because that's not only good for the plant, but that's also good for us. Another example, high fraction of blue light. What happens with blue light? Well, I showed already with the earlier picture, with a lot of blue, plants are relatively small, so it's not used so efficient by the plant. By the way, blue LEDs are also not so efficient in converting electricity into light as red LEDs. So yeah, blue light has some disadvantages, but we get nicely colored plants. These were grown with just 16% blue light. Here on the right, 90% blue. Just within a few days, you can get this purple plant. By the way, this does not work with every lettuce cultivar, because some cultivars will always stay green. But cultivars that can form purple leaves, we can just by depending on the spectrum, and then the measurements, of course, are here all on neutral light. Well, then we get this nice color. Well, what is it? It's a pigment in the plant that are anthocyanin, which is an antioxidant. So, and antioxidants are often also assumed to be good for our health. So what is now the idea? Initially, we need to maximize the yield. So initially, we start with not too much blue light. And then shortly before harvest, we increase the light level in case we want to have a purple plant. So yeah, in fact, the needs of the plant, they change within a day during the growth cycle. I mentioned that already. Energy prices fluctuate as well within a day, from day to day. So we should change the light accordingly. We get a nice optimization study. I hope that the examples were clear about it. And we just recently published a very comprehensive review paper where we called it Vertical Farming Goes Dynamic. So where initially you can control everything. And then people thought, oh, now we need to keep everything constant. No, in the end, we have to fluctuate the condition based on the demands of the plant and based on the cost of it. Then we can also look at what crops to grow. Well, it needs to be crops with a high added value, in particular for fresh crops. Or so that is fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, strawberry. But it can also be pharmaceutical crops or nutraceutical crops. Young plant raising is typically also in the Netherlands, where all those big plants first, you raise as young plants. It's very vulnerable stage, very well works in the vertical farm. So this is the crops that we usually see. But what I want to mention is, at symposia, often people start with feeding the world. I also mentioned, oh yeah, we get 9 billion people. But feeding the world is a bit more than vegetables. This system is in particular suitable for fresh vegetables, fresh fruit. I can grow technically any crop, but it's not economic feasible for all crops. It is not feasible for rice. Well, technically yes, but not economically. And I want to show you a little calculation why it is so much more cost effective for lettuce to do and why it is not for wheat. I guess here you're all very familiar with numbers, so don't worry, it's simple. I need to go one more. I could do here a comparison of lettuce and wheat. And then if you take in big steps on how the growth, and then I do it per photon of light, per moles of photons of light. The basis of plant growth is the photosynthesis, dry mass production of the whole plant. Well, for wheat and lettuce, that's not so different. It's about 0.6 gram dry matter per mole of photons. But then, what do we eat of the plant? With lettuce, we more or less eat 90% of the plant. For wheat, well, you need to do it very good, but then 60% are the kernels. The rest is leaf, stem, and roots. So there, lettuce is already a little bit better. But then comes the big thing. Because I started here with dry mass. On a dry mass basis, the plants are quite similar. But in the end, you don't eat the dry lettuce normally. You eat a fresh one. Lettuce has only 4% dry mass. It's small, but that determines the growth. It's only 4%. So for every gram dry matter, we get 25 grams of fresh weight. Well, in wheat, those wheat kernels, there's not much water in it, so maybe 10%, so it's 1.1. So then we get a different calculation. And then we can look at the product price. Well, buy a kilogram of lettuce. Well, it is very variable on what it costs, probably ranging from 2 to 20 euro or dollar per kilogram. So let's say on average 10. I might be a factor 2 wrong, but in the end it doesn't matter for the calculation. Wheat, well, that's very cheap. Flour in the Dutch shop, I guess one euro per kilogram. Now then you see the last column. Well, if you could not follow all the numbers, but if you calculate it, just look at the last column on what is the revenue per photon. Well, for lettuce per photon of light, we get 13.5 cents, while for the wheat it is 0.04. And then you can also see, well, we can debate if my numbers are correct, even if I made some mistakes, 50%, 100% wrong. It is very clear. With 1 mole of photons, you get much more yield or economic return in lettuce than in wheat. So that's why I say, well, lettuce is now probably just economically possible. Then it is for wheat, still a long way to go. Well, with plants, what you grow very much also depends on the cultivar, the variety. If you look at field-grown crops, crops grown in the field, crops grown in the greenhouse, there has been a lot of breeding on new varieties adapted for that. And what do breeders do which makes the new varieties? If you grow in the field, they select the plants that can stand a lot of stresses. They can stand heat stress, drought stress, cold stress, pests, and diseases. That's very important because if the plants are not resistant to those stresses, it will not function well. But that comes at an expense. Where we grow in a vertical farm and we control everything and we prevent all those stresses, we can breed for many other aspects. Making, if you would really take the breeding and as an effort, and I think now also a number of breeding companies are doing that, we will get varieties which will be much better than the present ones. But the breeding process, using classical breeding, we cannot use, you could use genetic modification, you could go faster, but that's not what we want as well, society in Europe. Well, that takes 5 to 10 years before from idea to a new crop. Then the last few things a little bit about sustainability. I've talked already a little bit about it. Sustainability, you cannot say how, well, is something sustainable or not? It can be more or less, more sustainable, less sustainable, but we have to consider many different aspects. So pesticides, an important sustainability aspect. The idea with vertical farming is full hygiene. You grow in a building, but then there comes air in. Now, meat already using filters, for instance. People come in. People can bring in diseases. They can also bring in all-wave materials. So we need a high level of hygiene. And the idea is if you keep everything out, well, then there's also not something to destroy. Of course, COVID has also learned us, okay, hygiene can work very well, but not everything. So still, what is then needed? You need a very high level of monitoring system, and if there is then something happening, then you can take some action, and then an action, a non-chemical action. Very little nutrient use, but that's also what you do already in the Dutch greenhouses. We supply, so the nutrients, the nitrates, the phosphates, the potassium, etc. We supply, there is some drainage, but all the drainage water is collected and reused. There's complete recirculation. It's also standard in the Dutch greenhouses. Worldwide, it's hardly occurring in any country. In the Netherlands, it's already also obligatory, just common standard. Extremely little water use. I mentioned already earlier a few numbers. If we grow vegetables in the Mediterranean, on average, for the best growers, they are at 60 liters of water per kilogram. And that's in a region where they have problems with the amount of water. If we do it in a modern greenhouse, but then, let's say, where the open field is in the Mediterranean, now we'll compare it to a greenhouse in the Netherlands. So yes, it's a different climate, so it's not completely fair, but just standard now is 15 to 17 liters of water per kilogram of vegetable. And why is that? Because we reuse the water, we grow plants in a very efficient way. But in a vertical farming, we go much further. And the biggest difference, by the way, between the greenhouse and the vertical farm, because there is no leaching down to the soil. That is already tackled by the Dutch greenhouses. But 90% of the water taken up by the plant is transpired. So the transpired water is then water vapor, then we can regain it. Of course, then we need also to think about how to do it such that it does not cost a lot of energy. And then we can bring that down to just a few liters. So let's say 2 to 4 liters of water per kilogram of product. Extremely little land use, I think that is clear, huh? 70 kilograms per square meter of one shelf. There are many shelves above each other. I get also often questions, how about the biodiversity? Very important. Yeah, to be honest, the biodiversity in a vertical farm, no. Still, I would say it's very important for vertical farming. Or vertical farming is very important for biodiversity. If we need so little land use, well, then we can use, then we save on land use. Well, then we can build a highway or houses. But if you want to save biodiversity, give it back to nature. That really then contributes. And if you produce it very nearby where the consumers are, we can reduce the transport. Less food waste if we have it nearby, but also a longer shelf life of the product. Energy use, if it is about sustainability, that's the key point. That needs to go down really dramatically. Well, then, of course, we need to think in circularity. We first need to look at what goes in the system, what goes out of the system, how can we connect it? How can we connect it with urban areas? How can we connect it with industry or with waste? So yeah, there's here quite a number of things where we are also work on. How can we embed the vertical farms in, let's say, in general in society, connected to nearby industries, waste streams. Few other advantages, quite important, is the guarantees, what I said in the beginning, that you can say, well, on that day of the year, we produce so many kilograms of a defined quality. Food safety, very important, that there is no contaminations, that it is healthy, extra vitamins, or extra antioxidants, or extra fibers. But also there needs to be a marketing concept. So if you have this product, then it should also be sold as a product on how it is grown, because I think it's just important that consumers know what they eat and whether they like it or not, at least that they know what they eat. But I think it's also important that now as a marketing concept, we can say, well, this is locally produced, very hygienic, sustainable. Well, yeah, on many aspects very sustainable, but let's be fair, energy use is large. And is it then greenhouse or vertical farm? Yeah, I work on both systems and I see the advantage of both. And what I see more and more is that we're going to hybrid systems, where we have the greenhouses, the whole greenhouse industry, and now all the growers. Over the years, they always are looking at cost price. Can we make it cheaper? Can we make it cheaper? Can we make it cheaper? And now we get the vertical farming. Oh, can we innovate it? Can we make a better product? Now, that's nice then to combine the best of those two worlds, learn from each other. But what I also see is that new farms are starting up. And then it is not just a greenhouse or a vertical farm, but that are combinations. So then I'm at the end of my talk. So with vertical farming, a lot of opportunities. Initially it was a bit of too much of a hype. Now we are back to realism. It is highly sustainable on many aspects, but not yet on the energy. There we need a tremendous effect. Where it starts with reducing the use, what we use renewable, and then use it when it is cheap. It's relatively new, so there's still a lot of opportunities to improve. The plant responses we only understand, well, we understand a lot of it, but there's much more that we do not yet understand and where we can make benefit of it. New cultivars will need it. And then also in the end we go to this autonomous control based on sensors and algorithms. And also this hybrid form between greenhouses and vertical farm. And then where we initially had maybe a fairy tale, we go back to a fair story. And then I thank you for your attention and I'm there to answer questions.
Professor Marcelis, thank you very much for your passionate talk. It was really interesting. You touched upon many issues. I think there are some questions we can go into detail on a couple of things. Maybe I can ask one of the first questions. How does the watering of the plants work? Do you have some kind of dripping system
Okay.
floating from. Could you? Say
Okay,
that?
yeah, sorry that I indeed did not touch upon that, because for me it's already indeed so standard. Well, there were a few systems. There is no rain because it's inside. Usually there were no sprinkler installations, but there can be, well, depend a bit on the crop, there can be, some plants are just grown on water. So we have just troughs, trays with water in the water, or then also the fertilizer. So it can be just on water, that's one option. Or another option is that it is on an inert substrate. That could be cocoa peat, that could be rock wool, was what we see a lot. So that there are small blocks, or sort of pots where the plants are growing in. Well, then we have two systems, or that they are on a tray, and where we use to have the ebb and flood system. That means a few times a day we have a flood, 2 to 5 centimeters of water for a few minutes, and then it's taken away. Ebb and flood, or with every plant a dripper, so a small tube. Usually that is done with the bigger plants. Not if there are, let's say, many plants per square meter, then usually we don't have the dripper. If it would be tomato plants, where you usually have just a few plants per square meter, then usually every plant has a small tube. And then, depending on the amount of water that is needed, several times a day they get the water with the nutrients.
And this is fully automated.
Yes.
By sensors and.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's also, I would say, that's also in the Dutch greenhouses. That's just common practice in the greenhouse that works. Then, well, often it's just based on the radiation, because if there's more solar radiation, there's more transpiration in the crop status, but also some measurements of the water content of in the roots. Or if it is just a water tray, well, then it is simple, because then it's just maintaining the water level at the same amount. If it is with those others with the drip, if it dries out, it's measured. Oh, it's getting dry.
Yes.
And then and that's all automated.
Okay. And how many people are there present in such a? How many surveillance is there? Because you need people behind monitors, checking things.
I find it hard to say how many people you need and how to express it. And that's why I said I still see at some of those companies you're starting up that you have many people there. But I would say, no, that's not needed. You need only very few people.
Okay. Yeah. And then AI and robots.
Yes.
And they can.
And that's all possible, what I said, with the AI and the robots. But the reality is,
the
AI and the robots is often possible, but in many companies we don't see it yet.
Yeah. Are there questions in the audience? Go ahead.
How do you determine what nutrients to use that affect the flavor or the growth of a plant, as opposed to the nutrients available in common soil?
Okay, that's a very good question. Well, how to determine it? Of course, we know the basic principles of what nutrients the plants do need, and then it is it's indeed. We know very well, I would say, what we need for the growth of the plant. That's more or less known. But I think when it comes to the flavor, there's more. Oh, but that one we know very well, by the way.
Water bomb tomato.
I will explain what that is. That well, that was in the 1990s. It came already then in the German, because most of the Dutch tomatoes, by the way, they are exported to Germany. A lot of all the vegetables are exported to Germany. And then it came in the news that the Dutch tomato are the Wasserbomben, the water bombs. And that was also true. With a tomato, we can very much control the quality of the fruit. The major thing is the salt concentration in the rooting medium, so near the roots, whether it's in soil or soilless, does not matter. So how many salts there are, you could just think in osmotic potential. If the osmotic potential near the roots is more negative, to take up plants, it's a water potential gradient. So if there are more salts here, you need also more salts here to take up the water. That's how the plant adapts. So if you increase the salt concentration in the rooting medium, it will also increase in tomato, at least very strongly in the fruit. This is all very well known how we can control. Well, it's first started, by the way, by the cultivar. There are also some cultivars which are not so it starts with a cultivar choice. Then the salt concentration about the roots is very important for tomato. We know that very well. Then there's also, it is about light and it is about CO2. So, but these are the nutrients is very important. Yeah, and then you get the question, we know so well how to grow a very tasty tomato, and still many growers don't do it. Not the right cultivar choice, well, or not the right for quality. If we talk then to growers, because I often talk also to the Dutch growers, and you should not do it, you know how to improve the quality. Still, they often don't do it, and why is that? Because they get a few kilograms less. So if you choose a less tasty cultivar, just a few kilograms per square meter extra. And then if you reduce salt concentration, a few extra kilograms, and they say, oh, but yeah, and if I sell it, I get the same price. Yeah, so then I can also not say that the growers are stupid. I say, well, you as a sector should not do it, because I think in the long run, we should go for that quality. So I would say, yes, quality of tomato fruits is a choice in the end of the grower, but in fact, it's also a choice in particular, because most of it is sold in supermarkets, and in the supermarkets, often you can't see what the quality is. Yeah, you can see it's a small tomato or a big tomato fruit, but most of them, you don't know how they taste. So that's really a pity that there is not clear labels. Oh, well, we have the honey tomato. They are really nice. They're also more expensive. So yeah, it comes at a price. Apart from that, there are more subtle changes that we can also do in some other plants where we can go even further. And some of it we know, and also many other things we don't know, and we are studying. And in particular also when it comes to nutritional value, well, what is exactly nutritional value and how to control it by the environmental conditions.
Leo, thank you. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. We have a particularly well-developed sector in the Netherlands of greenhousing, and mostly there you find a lot of resistance in implementing new technology. Where are we today in the sector? Are we adapting to it? Are we still a little bit ignorant, or what's going on? What is your prediction in the coming 5 years?
Well, I think the greenhouse sector will further develop, and that will stay in the Netherlands, well, probably rather stable. So the greenhouses that are there, I expect that they will remain. At the same time, I see vertical farming coming up. So it will be another system next to the greenhouses, but vertical farming is really still beginning. It's still a very small percentage, but I will see it coming up, but I don't see that the greenhouses will disappear from the Netherlands. But also I will see what I said, I see also the future is that a number of companies do parts of the production process in the vertical farm, maybe the plant raising, the initial stages of the plant development. Some others will do it completely, or some others will do part of their production in the vertical farm, part in the greenhouse. And also I'm sure that those sectors will learn from each other.
Mm-hmm. Leo, to get an impression, which percentage globally is now from food coming from vertical farm?
Very tiny. It's just at maximum a few percent or 1%.
Few percent. Okay.
Yeah, so it's still very small.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the great and relevant talk. You mentioned the use of AI, and on the other hand, you mentioned the use of optimizing the use of energy. And well, recently it's been quite in the news that AI applications use a lot of energy. Do you take that into account in the research as well?
Yes. That's a very good point. Well, to be honest, I'm not an expert on the energy use of AI, so I cannot give a very good answer. But yes, that needs to be considered. But I think for AI, I guess, on developing all the algorithms, I guess we need a lot of energy. But once it is applied to, I think you can have much more simpler application. But I think then in the end, it's relatively small. But I must admit, I'm not an expert on energy use of AI. Mm-hmm. But maybe there are some other experts here on AI who can... There's also a question. Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned that the opportunity of this free or paid energy. Have there already been tests in giving light only when the energy price is negative?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not so difficult to make
yes.
this
well, I
trial.
think at present you cannot do it just only when it is negative, because there are not sufficient moments then, because let's say if you would not have light, then it is for a too long period dark. But I would say doing the research on how far can we go and how much can we adapt to that, I would say that type of research is now, I would say it's just in full swing, because it's a relatively new question that is so fluctuating, because up to recently, because it is relevant for vertical farming, but also for greenhouses. Up to quite recent, it was in the greenhouses, they're all using a co-generation of heat and power. But now more and more it is electricity based, and then you get this, and more renewable energy, so that you get these fluctuations. But for vertical farming, it's a relatively new question. We're working on it, but there's so many ways on how long periods is it really dark. Quite often that's not too long can be dark, but how low can you go? For how long? We are just in the early steps of the research on that part.
Thank you. I was wondering about the manufacturing on the resources, because I know from lamps at least, they only burn for so many hours, and that number is a lot less than you'd think. So I'm thinking there's a lot of farms, vertical farms, that have to replace all their lights every year or two, especially if you're burning them for 24 hours.
Okay, I'm not fully sure what the exact duration is, but I've not seen them that they need to replace within 2 years. What I more see is that after 4 years ago, the efficacy of the lamps was so much less than now. So I rather see that, how do you say that? So much better lamps now that is a reason to replace.
What about the countries where the energy costs are low? How about Norway?
Yes.
For example.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So strictly speaking, Netherlands is probably not the best country, because for one reason is already that growing in the greenhouse is very easy here, more easy than also in Norway. But then in Norway, energy prices, I think is indeed they're very much lower. So, and energy costs, let's say if it is 25 to 30% of the costs are related to energy, you can imagine there it is much more profitable. Or if you are in the Middle East, been in Abu Dhabi, it's ridiculous there that it just, water costs there a lot, but in this system we don't need much water. And energy is extremely cheap, but also parts in Canada, some places the electricity price is, it's very much cheaper than here. So yes, so it might be also that you get, depending on where energy is cheap, that you get these productions. So where I say, we can now produce nearby consumers, it might also happen that maybe you get some hubs where electricity price is cheap.
Yeah. And Emirates, the airline in Abu Dhabi, I think, is already, they have a vertical farm with very cheap electricity, of course, and they grow vegetables in the airplanes. Yeah. But that's, of course, an application in a very rich country. Do you think third countries might profit from this technology?
To be honest, I think, I get a lot of this question, and yes, there are a few farms also starting up, let's say in Africa.
Yes.
But considering that there is a high investment needed, so I expect therefore not too much in the lower developed countries. Let's first make the system cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So maybe if you're 10 years ahead from now, then I think it can be more common also in, let's say, lower income countries.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
I have two questions, if that's okay. The first one is about the difference in using LED lights versus, for example, incandescent lights or maybe sunlight in the electrical potential within the plant. So you talked about the heat of the plant. Of course, the heat is a form of the energy going out, but all these mitochondria within the cells use the different forms of photosynthesis to produce energy, right? So is there a difference in what kind of photons or what kind of...
Yes, but then I would distinct, let's say, for plant processes, mainly think in photons.
Yes.
And the energy term is mainly related for the temperature of the plant. Usually there's an optimum temperature. Most plants are optimum 20-25 degrees centigrade. If it's getting warmer, it's less good. If it's colder, it's all. So, and the other part is the transpiration. We need a minimum level of, because if there's more heat energy, in fact you get the heat balance, and then you get transpiration as the latent heat, that will be balancing. That's usually not the limiting factor. So I think the most important is the light, is the photons for photosynthesis. Well, the incandescent lamp has a very poor efficacy. If I can go back, the incandescent, what is it, green-yellow color, very low efficacy in converting electricity. And then where you see where, for instance, the purple line where the LEDs are, well, then you know already the story. I would say the photons, well, no, the photons are not exactly the same.
Yeah, but does it make a difference?
But they are not more efficient of the incandescent lamp.
And the second question would be, do you see a potential in using vertical farming for algae?
Yeah, I know there are a number of initiatives on that. I think it depends on if it is for algae, for what type of algae. If it is an algae, if it is just for the biomass, I guess economically it's difficult. If it is algae, we also have some algae for, for some specific compounds. Yeah, then it's much higher added value. So maybe there it could work, but I don't believe so much in just in the cheap biomass.
Okay. Okay.
Economically, yeah, that's the same as you can grow everything in the system, but can you do it economically?
Yeah, because the next question, I have one in between. You said there were plants who love to be in light for 24 hours. They can grow all day, so
yeah.
to say. What type of plants?
Oh, well, some lettuce plants can do. With lettuce, yes. Well, some lettuce plants grow very well under 24-hour light. Not all cultivars, so it is also cultivar dependent. Most tomatoes, also not all, don't grow well under 24 hours. Most, they get very disturbed growth.
Yes. Yeah,
and in simple terms, I could say, yeah, it's the same as a human. You need to sleep, but
they get tired.
But yes. Yeah, they are not humans. It works differently. But yeah, okay. A plant has also a circadian clock. So yes. A 24-hour clock, which is, by the way, not exactly 24. So that's why we can also play around a little bit with it. Yes. Just a few hours more or less is possible. Yeah. It's also cultivar dependent, and that makes also that we can make use of the sensitivity to different signals during the day. But yeah, some plants we can just use the 24-hour light.
Yes.
But some plants just get completely disturbed.
Yes. And can you said something about it, genetically engineer them so that they can grow 24 hours a day
yes.
with full light, 100%?
For instance, for tomato, we have done in my group also. In fact, we have the genes identified, which are responsible for that they can grow. Yeah. But then these genes, you can do that. Then you need classical breeding now in the Netherlands. You can use some molecular biology tools, but you cannot use the genetic modification. If you would do genetic modification, well, maybe in general you can do most things similar, but with genetic modification, it goes so much more faster.
Efficient, yes. But it's not allowed.
But it is not allowed. So let's say we are allowed to do it in research with a lot of permits, yes. But not if it is for let's say as a research tool we can use it. So we may use it to identify which genes are responsible, to understand the involvement of the genes, and then we can tell to the breeders, this is the gene you have to target for. But then do it with classical convention, and then it takes a number of years first to get the gene in, and only that gene. Yeah. Then you need also a number of years to test it.
It takes too long. But if there were no regulations, technically it's possible just to engineer.
Yeah, but also then it would still take a number of years. Okay. So still, it also then it is not that.
That's easy.
No, because it will take a while before you have the gene in, but then doing all the tests, and then still you need from starting with, then you have the plant, then it needs to produce a seed. Need a new cycle to test it, so that is where it takes the time.
Okay.
Coincidentally, my question was also about the genetic modification. Would you be in favor of releasing the ban on that, because the environment you're growing the plants in is already very much artificial?
Let's say it like that. From a technical point of view and as a research point of view, I would say let us use the genetic modification. We can go so much more faster, and I think we can do it in a safe way. And we don't do it here in Europe, but it is happening in the US, let's say outside Europe. And we all eat soybean. Almost, soybean is normally not grown in the Netherlands. It comes mostly from the States. They are genetically modified. So we say, well, we don't want genetic modification, but we still eat soybean, which are genetically modified. But that's a political debate. So I would say technically, I would absolutely be in favor. But of course, I also know the opinion of the society. And then I would say, if I would talk to growers, I would say, no, don't go there. Because if you do vertical farming or greenhouse and we want now this genetic modification, then people don't want to have your product. So for that reason, I would say no. But as a researcher, as a scientist, I absolutely think that that should be allowed.
Okay. Are there more questions, Iska?
Thank you for your talk. For Studium Generale, we are organizing an evening about a higher price of coffee beans, of coffee berries. In fact, that's because of the climate change, because it's very sensitive, the coffee bean, to heat or drought or cold and the fluctuating weather. Do you think it's possible to grow coffee plants in this kind of environments, controlled environments, and is it economically feasible?
Okay, so technically I can grow coffee very well. I will need to figure out a little bit, but I can grow any crop technically in a very good way. And by the way, with coffee, there are now some colleagues in Wageningen who are growing coffee in the greenhouse because of this question. But then the question comes, can we do it in an economic profitable way? I think it is, I have some doubts, let's say it like that. But yeah, if the coffee price is way even again double or something like that, but I think even with the high coffee prices, I don't think it can be economically profitable. I didn't do the calculation, but that is more based on a bit of gut feeling and overall knowledge.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, really thank you for the nice presentation. It was very insightful. I had a question about that recent research you published, that you don't want constant growing conditions, but are going more into some kind of dynamic environment.
Yes.
Well, of course, you need to be able to control that, so control the environment itself. And you need sensors for that, and like some sensors, like temperature sensors, are very developed and can be distributed over a whole greenhouse or vertical farm. But what about other sensors that are still lacking in the industry? What is missing?
Okay. Well, maybe to mention one thing, the same for greenhouse and for vertical farms. What most growers do, they control the climate. And I would say we should go from climate control to plant control, because that's what you grow. And you do that by the climate. But that's then partly also the answer, we need sensors on the plant. So we need, because let's say sensors of air temperature and air humidity, CO2 concentration, radiation, that is standard. Although in most cases just one sensor in the greenhouse for a big compartment, and we need them. Well, there's a lot of variability even also in the vertical farm. So we need ideally cheap sensors that can be spread at many places. But I think the key is now also to have these sensors on the plant, where I showed a few examples. And I think in particular fluorescence type of sensors which can instantaneously give an estimate of the rate of photosynthesis, which I would say that's the engine of the plant. So I particularly think about those type of sensors, maybe also hyperspectral sensors, but that is, let's say, chlorophyll fluorescence is much more known already how to exactly interpret. Hyperspectral sensors are coming up. Thermal imaging, well, because that tells a lot about, well, it is the temperature, of course, of the plant, which is more important than air temperature, but also tells us about the rate of transpiration. And although maybe that's not the most important rate, it tells a lot about how the plant is doing.
Ed? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question concerning, I believe in greenhouse agriculture, there's a high necessary, you require a lot of CO2 input to actually make it function. Is that the same with vertical farming, and how does it influence the sustainability aspect?
Okay, very good question. Yes, so photosynthesis is the basic process of plant growth. Light is absorbed by the leaf. We have CO2 plus water forms sugars. So there we need the CO2. Outdoor concentration now is a little bit above 400 ppm on average. If you would have a vertical farm and we would not supply, and it is closed, soon it will drop to maybe 200 or 100 ppm because the plants take up CO2, so it drops. And But let's say if it is 400 ppm or 800 ppm, if 800 ppm, you have 30% more photosynthesis because there is a rubisco, it's an no, that's the enzyme, but the CO2 is bound, but it can also be, the enzyme can use CO2 or oxygen, but it should take the CO2. If there's more substrate, more CO2, more photosynthesis, up to about 800,000 ppm compared to 400, you have a 30% increase. Above 1,000 ppm, not much more effect. So ideally, we go up to 800 or 1,000 ppm. And then where does that come from? At present in the greenhouses, most of the greenhouses in the Netherlands, they have a CHP, combined heat and power. So they have a gas, in fact an engine, natural gas goes in. What comes out? Heat, electricity, flue gases. Well, flue gases, then you have a cleaner, then that's where they have now the CO2 for free. But then think about, we are going towards a society where we don't have the fossil fuel, where we don't have, so then the greenhouse will not have this CO2 anymore. By the way, there's also now using it from or the OCAP pipeline in the Westland area from the industry in Rotterdam Harbour. I assume that will all get less if we're going to a fossil-free society. So then where the CO2 comes from? Well, they can come from biodigestion, so let's say from waste. It can also come from capture from the CO2. Well, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe people are working here on CO2 capture, because I think you have some very bright minds here about CO2 capturing, and just by accident last week we submitted a proposal for a next step in next sustainability, where I said, well, CO2 will get a limiting factor, and we work together with Wim Brilman here at the University of Twente. But that's just a proposal also on, okay, where does CO2 come from? Capturing from the air, or from biodigestion of biogenic waste.
Good, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I have a question on, okay, this is more efficient way of production, probably more efficient way of production. And we can use the area that we can use it for nature or other topics, but I'm not sure people will do that. And so that worries me. So I'm thinking, is in this concept, is there a possibility to mix it with ecology?
Okay. Yes, I see your point. Yeah, let's say I would say give land back to nature, but yeah, that's a political choice, and yeah, I know what I would do, but yeah, I'm not a politician. And then it's,
what would you do?
What
you can speak out freely.
Well, I would just say, well, if you want to, well, I think biodiversity is very important. So I think we should give back land to nature.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Then still, where I said, well, in the vertical farm, there's not too much biodiversity, but still what I want to use principle from ecology in it. Let's say where I said, well, we have, if we keep all pests out, we don't need to control it. Probably will not manage 100%, but still, we will then make use of the natural enemies, which is already common standard, common practice